I've been working as a forest ranger for nearly a decade now. Most of my career has been spent in quiet, peaceful locations. But when I heard the rumors about Mount Shasta, about UFOs, strange lights in the sky, and unexplainable phenomena, I couldn't help myself. I had to see it for myself. They say curiosity killed the cat. For me, I think it nearly killed my sanity. It was one of those chilly, foggy mornings in California when I first set foot on the rugged paths that wind around Mount Shasta. The mountain looms like an ancient sentinel, casting long shadows over the pine forests and deep valleys below. The locals, some of whom had lived there their entire lives, would often tell me to stay away from the mountain's mysteries. But the stories were too much. Some spoke of bright lights descending from the sky, others claimed they'd heard voices in the wind, and a few said the mountain itself was alive, watching, waiting. I had heard all kinds of strange things, but I never thought I would find myself investigating them. As a native ranger, I was trained to protect and serve, but not to chase the unknown. Yet, something deep inside me urged me to keep moving closer to the heart of the mountain. On my first day there, I noticed something strange. The air felt different, almost electric. It wasn't like the usual California air I was used to, the crisp, dry scent of pine and dust. This was heavier, thicker, almost charged with something beyond the natural. I shrugged it off at first. After all, I was there to do my job, not to be caught up in wild theories. But as the days passed, I started seeing things that didn't quite add up. The locals were tight-lipped, eyes darting nervously when I asked them about the oddities surrounding Mount Shasta. "You're on your own with that one, Ranger," they'd say. "Some things are better left alone." One older man, whose face was weathered from decades spent in the mountains, gave me a warning I couldn't shake. "Don't go poking around out there, boy. Some things aren't meant to be seen." He had said it casually, almost offhand, but something in his voice made my stomach tighten. He wasn't just talking about bears or mountain lions. There was something else, something he didn't want to say out loud. I couldn't ignore the feeling gnawing at me, so I decided to stay another night at one of the old ranger stations on the mountain's edge. It was the last place anyone would expect to see anything out of the ordinary. No tourists, no hikers, just the mountain and its ancient silence. That night, after the sun had set and the stars flickered above like diamonds scattered across a dark velvet blanket, I decided to take a walk around the station. There was an old trail that led deeper into the forest, one I hadn't explored before. I had just started walking when I saw it. A light, barely visible at first, hovered in the distance. It wasn't a plane or a helicopter. It was too still, too controlled. My heart began to race as I watched it move slowly, almost deliberately across the sky. My instincts kicked in. I reached for my radio to contact the others, but it was dead. No signal. The light flickered out, disappearing behind the trees. I froze, unsure of what to do next. My training told me to report this, but there was no one to report it to. That's when I heard the first sound, a distant hum, almost like a low vibration in the air, but it seemed to come from everywhere at once. I've been to places where the wind howls, where the trees creak in the cold, but this was something else entirely. It wasn't natural. I walked deeper into the woods, the hum growing louder as I followed the faint trail of light. My breath was shallow, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. What if this wasn't just a UFO? What if it was something far worse? Something that had been here long before humans ever set foot in these woods? I had no answers, only the overwhelming urge to keep moving forward. The further I walked, the more the environment seemed to shift. The trees grew unnaturally tall, their branches reaching out like arms. The air grew thick again, almost suffocating, and the hum morphed into a low growl, vibrating through my chest. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. Something was watching me, waiting. Just as I was about to turn back, I heard a voice. Not a voice I could explain. Not human, not animal. But something deep inside me knew it was there. It said my name. Ranger. The voice echoed through my mind, a whisper carried by the wind. And then, everything went dark. When I woke up, I was back at the ranger station. My head throbbed, as if I'd been knocked out cold, but there was no sign of what had happened. No signs of struggle. No sign of the eerie voice. Just the cold, crisp air of Mount Shasta creeping through the walls of the station. I glanced at my watch. Hours had passed, but it felt like I'd been gone for days. I checked my radio again. It was still dead. No signal. I tried to remind myself that I was trained for situations like this, but there was no protocol for something like what I had just experienced. I had to rely on my instincts, but even those were faltering now. I stepped outside, the weight of the mountain pressing down on me. The sun was high in the sky, but the trees around the station felt darker than they should have been. The forest seemed to swallow the light. I shook it off and forced myself to focus. I had a job to do. The locals here weren't like people I had encountered before. Many of them had been born and raised on the mountain, their lives intertwined with the mysteries that surrounded it. It wasn't just the stories of UFOs or strange lights. They spoke about an energy here, a pull, something ancient that had been with the mountain for centuries. I met a few of them the day before my encounter. One of them was a woman named Helen, an older local who lived alone in a cabin just off the trail. She had the look of someone who had seen too much, her weathered face marked with years of quiet contemplation. She had warned me about the mountain's history, but when I asked her what she knew about the lights and the strange happenings, her face had grown pale. "You don't know what you're asking about," she had said. "There's a reason people avoid these woods. The mountain, it knows things that no man should ever understand." At the time, I thought she was just another eccentric, but now, with everything that had happened to me, her words felt heavier, laden with an unspoken truth I wasn't ready to face. The other local I had met was Marcus, a younger man who worked at the local gas station. He had told me casually about his odd experiences on the mountain, but I could tell he wasn't exactly eager to dive deeper into those memories. When I asked him what he thought of the rumors surrounding Mount Shasta, his face had hardened. "I don't know about UFOs or aliens," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans, "but something's out there, something that doesn't like people poking around. I've seen people disappear. Hell, even seen some things I can't explain." He paused, almost like he regretted saying that. "Just be careful, man. You're not the first to get curious and end up in over your head." I nodded then, brushing off the discomfort that had settled in my stomach. After all, this was my job, to investigate, to protect, to report. But deep down, I knew something about this mountain was different. And it wasn't just the local stories. It was the feeling in the air, the oppressive silence of the forest. There was an ancient energy here, something older than time itself, and it was as if the land itself was warning me to turn back. I thought about Marcus's warning as I made my way back into the woods the next day. The trees towered above me, their trunks thick and twisted, as if they were growing in unnatural shapes. They didn't seem to be swaying in the wind as they should have. It was like they were frozen, waiting, watching. It made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The deeper I ventured, the more surreal everything seemed. The mountain seemed to change as I walked further. There was no clear path anymore, just a strange compulsion that kept pulling me forward. The forest grew denser, the air thicker, and I began to notice an odd quiet that surrounded me. No birds, no rustling of leaves, nothing. And that's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just another illusion, the result of exhaustion or stress. But then I blinked, and it was still there. A figure, standing just outside the range of my flashlight. It was tall, unnaturally tall, with a shape that didn't belong in the woods. Its features were indistinguishable, hidden in the shadows, but I could feel its presence. The way it stood, rigid, unmoving, felt wrong, like it was waiting for something. I froze, not knowing whether to run or keep walking. Then, the voice came again. "Ranger." This time, it wasn't just a whisper. It was clear, like someone was standing right next to me, calling my name in a low, melodic tone that sent a chill down my spine. I turned quickly, but there was no one there. Just the darkness of the forest, and the growing sense that I was not alone. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. Suddenly, the ground beneath my feet gave way, and I stumbled, catching myself just in time to avoid falling into the unknown depths of the forest. As I regained my footing, I looked up and saw something I could never have prepared myself for. The trees above me shifted, the branches bending in unnatural ways, forming a path that led me deeper into the woods. I knew then that this mountain was no ordinary place. It wasn't just the rumors or the strange lights. Something far more terrifying was waiting for me. And whatever it was, it had been watching me from the moment I stepped foot here. The path the trees had formed led me further into the heart of Mount Shasta. Every step felt deliberate, as if the mountain itself were guiding me, or perhaps drawing me into something far darker than I could imagine. The forest around me seemed to breathe, shifting subtly as if aware of my presence. There was no way out now, no turning back. As I ventured deeper into the woods, the oppressive silence returned. The world felt entirely still, unnervingly so, like I was the only living thing left. Even the air was thick, heavy with the weight of some unseen force. The shadows of the trees loomed larger, stretching in ways that didn't make sense. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not by an animal, not by the normal predators of the forest, but by something far more sinister. My thoughts kept returning to the figure I had seen earlier, the tall, shadowy form lurking just outside the beam of my flashlight. It felt wrong, like a trick of the mind, a ghostly projection, but at the same time, it felt so solid, so real. The voice, that melodic whisper, still echoed in my ears. "Ranger," I couldn't get it out of my head. I pressed on, though my instincts screamed at me to turn back. But there was something inside me now, something I couldn't explain, a pull that demanded I move forward. It was as if the mountain was calling to me, urging me to uncover its secrets, to confront whatever darkness had long been buried beneath its towering peaks. As I pushed further, I stumbled upon a clearing, an unnatural one. There were no trees here, only rocks scattered in a strange formation. I crouched down to examine them, but they seemed ordinary at first glance, just rocks, worn smooth by time. However, something about the pattern they formed made my skin crawl. It was a circle. No, not just a circle, it was a symbol, one I couldn't quite place but felt oddly familiar. It almost looked like an ancient language, but nothing I had seen before. I took a step back, my heart racing as I felt a sudden wave of nausea hit me. Something wasn't right about this place, and the closer I got to the center of it, the stronger the sense of dread became. A whisper filled the air, this time, more than just a voice. It was a chorus of voices, overlapping, unintelligible, but full of emotion. They were calling, chanting, begging. And then I understood. This place wasn't just a clearing in the woods. It was a site, an altar, a place where something ancient had been worshipped. Something that still lingered, trapped between the physical world and something darker. It felt like a convergence of forces, the air thick with something ancient and terrible. The earth beneath me shifted slightly, like it was alive, moving just beneath the surface. I could feel it, a hum, low and almost imperceptible at first, but it grew louder, reverberating through the soles of my boots. I knew that I was standing on something sacred, something that shouldn't be disturbed. I turned to leave, but before I could make my way back, I heard the voice again. "Ranger, you mustn't leave." I froze. This time, the voice was much clearer, more urgent. The air shifted again, this time colder, and I felt an overwhelming sensation of being trapped. The trees around me seemed to close in, forming an almost suffocating canopy above. The shadows stretched farther, reaching down toward me, and I realized that they weren't just shadows. They were something else, something far older. From the edge of the clearing, I saw movement. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I saw it again. The figure. It was standing in the trees, just outside the circle of light from my flashlight. Taller than any human, its form was indistinct, a shifting mass of shadows that seemed to pulse with some unnatural energy. And then, for the briefest moment, I thought I saw its eyes. I didn't wait to confirm. I bolted, adrenaline flooding my system as I ran back toward the trail. But the woods were no longer familiar. The trees twisted in strange angles, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands, grabbing at my clothes, pulling me off course. The forest felt alive, and I was its prey. I didn't know what was chasing me, whether it was the thing I had seen, or something else entirely. I didn't care. I just had to get away. My breaths were ragged as I stumbled through the underbrush, desperately trying to find the path I had come from. But the deeper I ran, the more distorted the woods became. Nothing made sense anymore. The trees twisted like they were alive, the ground beneath me was shifting, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. It was like the mountain itself was alive, and it was angry that I had dared to tread on its sacred ground. I reached a small ravine, a familiar spot I had passed before, and stopped for a moment to catch my breath. I wasn't sure how far I had run or how much time had passed, but I knew I had to keep moving. Then I heard it, the sound of footsteps. Someone knew something was behind me. I turned quickly, but the moment I did, a cold, sharp pain shot through my side. I gasped, falling to my knees. My flashlight rolled away into the shadows, leaving me in complete darkness. From the blackness, the voice came again, low and cold, like a breath over my ear. "You should not have come here." The ground beneath me trembled, and I could feel the earth moving once again. Whatever it was that haunted Mount Shasta, it wasn't letting me go. The mountain had claimed me, and I was just another lost soul to be added to its collection. The tension was almost unbearable as I continued to stumble through the woods, each step seemingly drawing me deeper into the heart of Mount Shasta's twisted mystery. But it wasn't just the physical danger that threatened to consume me. It was the unraveling of everything I thought I knew, every belief I had held onto in my life, now being tested in ways I couldn't comprehend. Mount Shasta wasn't just a place of strange occurrences. It was a reflection of something darker, a place where hidden truths bled into the physical world, and I was caught in the middle of it. As I stumbled forward, trying to escape whatever was pursuing me, I couldn't help but think about the first time I had heard about Mount Shasta and its reputation. Growing up as a ranger, I had heard plenty of wild stories about the mountain, tales of UFO sightings, strange lights in the sky, and rumors of Native American legends that spoke of ancient beings living in the depths of the mountain. But I never took them seriously until now. In my mind, I always thought of it as just another piece of folklore, the kind that people cling to when they don't have answers for the inexplicable. But this wasn't folklore. This wasn't a story. I was living it. And the more I learned, the more I realized how little I understood about the forces at play here. I wasn't just facing a haunted place. I was facing something far older, far more dangerous than I could ever have imagined. As I continued to make my way through the labyrinth of trees, a different story, a buried memory, began to surface in my mind. The tales I had heard as a kid about the mountain's mysterious power didn't just come from the locals. There were others who had ventured here with similar motives, scientists, adventurers, thrill-seekers. But none of them had come back the same. I'd heard whispers in ranger circles about those who had wandered too deep into the woods, vanishing without a trace, their names forgotten by everyone but the trees. It wasn't just the physical dangers that awaited those who dared challenge the mountain's grip. It was the psychological toll it took on its victims. The paranoia, the sense of being hunted, of losing control. I could feel it now, like an invisible weight pressing down on my chest, the sense that something was just around the corner, waiting for me to make one wrong move. I wasn't just running from an unknown entity. I was running from the mountain itself, a living, breathing thing that wanted me to unravel. I had always believed that the stories about Mount Shasta were exaggerated, that the stories about UFOs, alien encounters, and disappearances were just that, stories. But in that moment, as the whispers grew louder and the shadows lengthened around me, I began to question everything I had known. Was it all connected? The strange lights in the sky, the vanishing people, the unsettling sensation that I was being pulled deeper into something from which there was no return? Or was I simply losing my grip on reality? At the same time, I couldn't ignore the history of the place. Mount Shasta was steeped in Native American mythology, and the legends spoke of powerful beings, guardians of the earth, spirits tied to the very soul of the mountain. According to the stories, these beings had the power to shape the world around them, manipulating time, space, and even the physical realm. It was said that they could call upon the stars, summoning forces beyond human comprehension. The mountain, with its immense and unknowable power, had been a sacred site for centuries, long before white settlers came to California. As the hours passed, I began to piece together the threads of this puzzle. The strange energy I had felt in the clearing, the whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, the unrelenting presence of the shadowy figure. These weren't just random occurrences. They were part of a larger pattern, a network of forces that had been working long before my arrival. This wasn't just about some alien presence or a string of bad luck. It was about an ancient power tied to the land itself, a power that had been waiting for someone like me to stumble into its grasp. In a moment of clarity, I remembered something else, the disappearances. The rangers who had come here and vanished, the hikers who had never returned. Most people thought they had gotten lost, that they had simply succumbed to the dangers of the wilderness. But I knew better now. The mountain had claimed them. It wasn't just about being lost. It was about something deeper, something that caused you to lose your sense of self, to become a part of the forest, a whisper in the wind. The people who had disappeared, what had they seen? What had they experienced before they vanished? I knew deep down that whatever they had encountered was tied to me now. I had been drawn into the same web, the same pattern that had claimed countless others before me. I began to wonder if there was a way to escape, to break free from the pull of Mount Shasta and its ancient guardians. But as the minutes dragged on and the shadows seemed to close in around me, I realized that the mountain wasn't just a place. It was a force, an entity with a will of its own. And it wasn't done with me yet. But what did it want from me? Was I being tested, like those who had come before me? Or was it too late for answers, too late to change anything? My body was exhausted, my mind unraveling, but the presence was still there, surrounding me, pressing down on me, pushing me towards some unknown conclusion. The deeper I went, the less I understood, and the more it seemed like there was no escape from this twisted reality. The mountain was suffocating me. The trees pressed in tighter, the ground beneath my feet seemed to shift with each step, and the air felt thick with something that didn't belong to this world. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to leave the dense forest and never look back. But there was no turning back. Mount Shasta wasn't just a place on a map anymore. It had become a part of me. A weight in my chest, a chill in my bones that I couldn't shake, no matter how fast I ran or how deep I tried to go. It was only when I came across something unexpected that the truth began to reveal itself, in a way I had never anticipated. The shift came without warning, like the sudden cracking of ice beneath a heavy weight. I had been wandering deeper into the woods, searching for something, a way out, maybe, or an answer. I wasn't sure anymore. All I knew was that the strange force pulling at me was getting stronger, and whatever it wasn't going to let me go. I had no idea how long I'd been walking. Hours? Days? It was hard to tell with the sun hidden behind the thick canopy of branches above me. The air was growing colder, and the usual sounds of the forest, the rustling of leaves, the calls of animals, had faded to silence. My own breathing was loud in my ears, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder every few steps, the feeling of being watched growing stronger by the second. That's when I stumbled into a clearing. It was too perfect, too unnatural. The trees formed a perfect circle around the center, their trunks wide and ancient, their branches twisted and reaching like arms of some forgotten god. In the middle of the clearing stood a massive stone altar, worn by centuries of neglect, but still imposing in its presence. The stone was dark, almost black, with intricate carvings that seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them. It felt like the kind of place where rituals were performed, the kind of place where something sacred and unspeakable had once occurred. But the strangest part, the altar was not alone. Lying on the altar was something, or someone, covered in a dark, tattered cloth. I didn't approach immediately. Something told me to keep my distance, to run, but curiosity, that same feeling that had brought me here in the first place, pushed me forward. I couldn't explain it, but I had to know what was under that cloth. Slowly, I reached out with trembling hands and pulled the cloth away. The body beneath was not human. It was an alien, its form disturbingly familiar, but not quite right. It was tall, thin, with elongated limbs and a head too large for its body. Its skin was pale and smooth, like something that had never known the warmth of the sun, and its eyes, wide, black, and unblinking, seemed to bore into my soul. The creature's chest rose and fell, shallow and slow, as if it were still alive, but its body was cold to the touch, its once luminous skin now dull and lifeless. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. This was what had been drawing me here all along. The UFO sightings, the strange lights, the rumors of abductions, they were all true, but that wasn't what made my stomach churn with fear. No, what terrified me more than the alien corpse lying before me was the realization that I wasn't alone in the clearing anymore. I turned quickly, my heart pounding in my chest. The shadows had shifted. From behind the trees, figures emerged. They were not human either. Tall, dark, their faces obscured by the hoods of long, tattered cloaks. They moved in unison, their footsteps barely making a sound as they closed in on me. The air grew thick with a sense of something ancient, something powerful. These beings, they weren't just creatures. They were guardians, protectors of the mountain, of the secrets buried within it. And they were here to stop me from uncovering the truth. I backed away, my heart racing, my breath coming in quick gasps. But there was nowhere to run. The clearing, this strange sanctuary, felt like a trap, the earth itself rising up to keep me in place. The beings circled around me, their presence suffocating, their eyes hidden beneath the hoods of their cloaks. But I could feel their gaze on me, piercing through me like 1,000 needles. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking, though I tried to sound confident. "What do you want with me?" They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Instead, they reached out in unison, and something dark, something cold, began to seep into my mind, into my very thoughts. It was an alien presence, not like the peaceful explorers from the stars I had once imagined. No, this was something older, something darker. Their silence was deafening, and it carried with it an oppressive weight, a promise of things that should never be understood by human minds. In that moment, everything snapped into focus. The aliens, the disappearances, the whispers in the wind, it was all connected. I wasn't here by accident. I had been chosen, not for some noble cause, not for some grand purpose, but because Mount Shasta had claimed me, had drawn me into its fold. The mountain was alive, and it had been waiting for someone like me, someone who had heard the call and couldn't resist. It was then that the world around me began to blur, the shadows merging with the trees, the figures growing taller, more imposing. I could hear voices now, faint whispers that echoed in the back of my mind, urging me to give in, to accept what was happening. This was it. This was the turning point. I had crossed the threshold, and there would be no going back. As the figures closed in, I could feel the pressure building, the weight of centuries of history and power pressing down on me. And for the first time, I truly understood the danger of Mount Shasta. It wasn't just a place, it was a living thing, a force beyond anything I could ever hope to control. And now it had me in its grasp. But I wasn't going to give up so easily. Something inside me still burned, still fought to survive. I was trapped. There was no denying it. The figures in their cloaks had surrounded me, and the weight of the forest seemed to press in from all sides. The air felt thick, dense with energy, unnatural, alive, and oppressive. The voices in my head had grown louder, almost deafening now. They whispered in languages I couldn't comprehend, but their meaning was clear. This place, this mountain, had a power that bent the rules of reality itself, and I was in its grip. I had never felt anything like this before. The sensation wasn't physical, not exactly. It was more like the entire world around me had shifted, warped, and suddenly, I wasn't in the forest anymore. I was standing in a place that existed between worlds, where time and space lost all meaning. The air was sharp, almost electric, but there was something else. Something wrong. It felt like the forest had turned against me, as if the trees, the very earth beneath my feet, were alive and aware of my presence. But no matter how deep my fear ran, I couldn't let it paralyze me. There was no escape, I knew that much. But I also knew that I had one thing on my side, my will to survive. I wasn't about to become another victim swallowed whole by the mysteries of Mount Shasta. The truth, whatever it was, had been dragging me here, pulling me towards this moment. I couldn't back down now, even if it meant facing something I couldn't understand. The hooded figures, these strange guardians of the mountain, didn't approach me directly. They stood still, watching, their silence unsettling. But in that silence, I could feel their judgment, their evaluation of me. They weren't here to harm me, not directly at least. They were testing me, watching for a reaction, waiting to see how far I was willing to push the boundaries of my own mind. But whatever game they were playing, they were about to find out that I wasn't like the others who had stumbled into this cursed place. I wouldn't break. Not yet. The first thing that happened was a shift in the atmosphere. The shadows of the trees seemed to grow longer, more pronounced, creeping outwards toward me. And then, without warning, the ground beneath me trembled. It wasn't like an earthquake, not at all. This felt controlled, intentional. The earth was moving, yes, but it was as if the mountain itself was shifting, its ancient bones creaking and groaning in a language I couldn't understand. The air around me became thick with a palpable energy, charged like static before a lightning strike. I felt it, the change. Suddenly the world went cold. A sharp, biting chill that sunk into my skin, into my bones. It wasn't like the cool mountain air. This was something else, something darker. A chill that spoke of forgotten things, things buried beneath the surface for too long. The wind picked up, rustling through the trees, but instead of the usual sounds of nature, the wind seemed to carry with it a strange, guttural hum, like a low-frequency vibration that rattled my teeth. It was as if the trees were singing in some alien tongue, a song I wasn't meant to hear, a song that made my skin crawl. And then I saw it, the first sign that everything was about to change. The alien body on the altar, the one I had uncovered, began to stir. Its chest, once still and cold, now rose and fell with shallow, labored breaths. The pale skin twitched, as if the creature was waking from a long, unnatural slumber. My heart stopped in my chest. What was happening? Was it coming back to life? Was this some sort of ritual? But before I could process the implications of what I was seeing, the figures around me moved. Slowly, methodically, they stepped forward, their cloaks trailing behind them like shadows. I was caught in the middle, a spectator in a drama that I had no part in. Yet everything about it was pulling me in. The closer they came, the more I could feel the pressure in my chest, as if something was squeezing the air out of me. I struggled to breathe, to think. The leader, the tallest figure, the one who had been standing at the center of the group, reached out, its long fingers stretching toward me. I recoiled instinctively, but there was nowhere to go. Its touch, when it finally made contact with my arm, wasn't physical. It was something else, something I couldn't explain. It was like the very fabric of my mind had been touched, disturbed. It felt as if the creature was reaching inside me, pulling at the very core of my being, trying to unlock something deep within my psyche. For a moment, everything went black. When I came to, I wasn't standing in the clearing anymore. The trees had disappeared. The ground was no longer beneath my feet. I was floating, suspended in a void of infinite blackness, surrounded by an oppressive silence that was worse than the screams of the forest. And then, like a sudden flash of light, images began to form in front of me. They were fleeting, blurry at first, but they quickly began to sharpen, to crystallize into something clear, something undeniable. The truth. I saw the alien race, the beings from the stars, fleeing from something that had wiped out their home. I saw their desperation, their last-ditch efforts to find a new place to survive. And then Mount Shasta appeared, a safe haven, or so they thought. They had come here to escape, to hide from the destructive force that had nearly torn apart their world. But they weren't the only ones who had found the mountain. The guardians, these dark figures, had been waiting for them, watching over this ancient place. And when the aliens had arrived, they had been bound to the mountain by a force older than time itself. The mountain was not a sanctuary, it was a prison. I understood now. Mount Shasta wasn't just a place for the alien race to hide, it was their tomb. And I had unknowingly become part of their twisted legacy. The guardians weren't protecting the mountain. They were ensuring that no one would ever leave it. And I was now a prisoner too. The realization hit me like a freight train, leaving me reeling in the aftermath. I was caught in a web of forces far beyond anything I had ever imagined. The guardians, the aliens, and the mountain itself. It was all part of something much bigger than I could ever hope to understand. For a moment, I felt the weight of it all, the crushing weight of being utterly powerless. But that feeling of being overwhelmed, of being at the mercy of something I couldn't even begin to fathom, didn't last long. I had to survive, no matter what. I wasn't just some helpless observer, I was a part of this. And if I was going to escape, I would have to find a way to take control of the situation. That thought, control became my anchor. I didn't know how I was going to do it yet, but I had learned enough from my time in the forest to know one thing. I had underestimated it. The guardians weren't just manipulating me. They were toying with me, trying to see how far they could push me before I broke. But I wasn't going to break. Not now, not ever. I still had my mind, my wits, and I wasn't going to lose them. I had to outthink this. The key to overcoming this was in the same place that had brought me here in the first place, the forest itself. It was alive, yes, but it was also full of secrets. And somewhere within those secrets was my path to freedom. I knew that the mountain itself wasn't just a geographical location. It was a living, breathing entity. It had a history, an ancient one, tied to the beings who had come here before me. But it also had a rhythm, a heartbeat, something I could sense deep in my gut. There was a balance, and I had to find a way to tip it in my favor. I began to pay closer attention to my surroundings, to the patterns I had previously missed. The guardians were still around me, watching, silent as ever. Their eyes, hidden beneath their hoods, seemed to follow every movement I made. But I wasn't going to let them intimidate me. They were powerful, yes, but they were still bound by the same rules of the world I inhabited. And if there was one thing I had learned in my years as a ranger, it was how to read the land, how to read the forest. The trees weren't just silent witnesses to what was happening. They were participants in this drama. There was a deep connection between the guardians and the mountain, and I could feel it. The guardians weren't just spirits of the mountain. They were its extensions. Their presence was as much a part of the mountain as the roots beneath my feet. The ancient power that the mountain held wasn't just a physical force. It was a mental one too. And if I could tap into that power, I could find a way to fight back. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes, trying to center myself. I could hear the wind moving through the trees, a soft, constant whisper. It wasn't just the wind. It was the pulse of the forest, the pulse of the mountain. The guardians had been here for eons, and they were part of the landscape. No, part of the very fabric of reality that the mountain had woven around itself. But what if I could use their connection to the land against them? What if the very thing that made them powerful could be the thing that would bring them down? As I stood there, eyes closed, I reached for the ground beneath me. My fingers brushed against the rough surface of a stone, cold and ancient. It wasn't just a stone, it was a part of the mountain, a part of the power that flowed through it. I focused on it, felt its connection to everything around me, and I allowed that energy to flow through me. It was subtle at first, like a faint pulse that I could almost feel beneath my skin, but then it grew stronger, more intense. I could feel the mountain itself waking up, responding to my presence. The guardians must have sensed it too, because for the first time, they moved. Slowly, deliberately, they began to encircle me. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I could feel their power, but I also felt my own. They weren't invincible, and I wasn't powerless. I had underestimated them, yes, but they had also underestimated me. The figure closest to me raised a hand, and I felt a surge of energy rippling through the air. The force of it was like a physical blow, knocking me backward, but I didn't fall. My body was bruised, but my spirit was stronger than ever. The mountain was alive, and I was becoming a part of it. I could feel the power shifting, surging through me in ways that defied logic. It was like I had become one with the land itself, its pulse, its energy, its strength. The Guardians were trying to fight me off, but they didn't realize that I had tapped into something they couldn't control. I had become the embodiment of the mountain's will. I could feel it inside me, the ancient knowledge, the memories of those who had come before me. They weren't just specters. They were part of the mountain's legacy. And now, so was I. I opened my eyes, and the world around me had changed. The air crackled with energy, the forest was alive with movement, and the Guardians were no longer in control. They tried to close in on me, but they faltered. The energy that flowed from me repelled them, and they backed off, confused, hesitant. I wasn't just a lone ranger anymore. I was a force of nature. The change had come. The mountain was no longer an alien place. It had become my domain, a place where I could bend the rules to my will. The Guardians could no longer keep me contained. I had learned their secret, and now I held the key to my escape. But it wasn't enough to just survive. I had to get out. I had to destroy the hold they had over me, over this place. And I wasn't going to stop until I did. The air around Mount Shasta had changed. It was thicker now, heavier with an unspoken tension. The Guardians were watching me, but it wasn't the same as before. They had retreated into the shadows, their presence lingering in the periphery of my awareness. They knew the battle was no longer one-sided. I had tapped into something far more ancient than they could comprehend. But that realization did little to ease the unease creeping through me. This place, this mountain, it was still a puzzle, and I was still just one piece in a much larger game. I had spent days walking its trails, learning its rhythms, its pulse, its power. But now, as I felt the weight of the impending clash, I knew the moment had come to finally face the force that had been guiding me, shaping my destiny, whether I wanted it or not. I could no longer stand in the shadows of uncertainty. It was time to confront the truth about this place and about myself. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the landscape, the last remnants of the day's light seemed to drain into the earth. The mountain was awake, alive in a way I had never felt before. The wind had died down, and the usual rustling of the trees had quieted. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting. Even the stars above, usually bright and piercing, seemed to dim, as if the sky itself was waiting for something. The Guardians hadn't made a move since my last confrontation with them. But I knew that silence was only temporary. They were planning something, waiting for me to make the next move. They understood now that I was not just some naive outsider who had wandered into their domain. I had become part of it. The question now was, what would I do with this power? How far could I go before it consumed me? Before I became just another lost soul trapped in the web of Mount Shasta's ancient grip? My mind raced, and I paced back and forth in the clearing, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I could feel the mountain's heartbeat, its rhythm, pulsing in my chest. I had made it this far, but I knew the hardest part was yet to come. To leave this place, to break the hold the Guardians had over me, I would have to do more than just survive. I had to confront the source of their power. I had to face whatever lay beneath the surface of the mountain, whatever was pulling the strings from the shadows. I wasn't foolish enough to think I could take on the Guardians directly. Their power was too great, their knowledge too vast. They were as old as the mountain itself, and they had been here long before I had even set foot in California. But I had something they didn't, the knowledge of their weakness. I had learned how they depended on the mountain's energy, how they fed off its ancient force to maintain their control. If I could cut off that connection, if I could sever the ties between the Guardians and the land, maybe, just maybe, I could break their hold. I wasn't alone in this fight. I had learned that much over the past few days. The mountain itself, the trees, the stones, the wind, they were my allies now. They could feel my presence, and I could feel theirs. The Guardians thought they were the only ones with the power to control the land, but they were wrong. The forest was alive, and it could choose who to empower. It had chosen me. I stood at the edge of the clearing, staring up at the towering peaks of Mount Shasta. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a cold, silvery light over the landscape. In the distance, I could just make out the outlines of the Guardians moving in the shadows. They hadn't noticed me yet, but I knew they were getting ready to strike. They would come for me soon. I couldn't afford to waste any more time. I needed to act quickly, before the Guardians could reassert their dominance. My hand brushed against the stone at my side, and I felt a surge of energy coursing through me. I closed my eyes, focusing on the connection between the mountain and myself. It wasn't just a physical force, it was mental, spiritual. The guardians had tapped into that force, but I could feel it flowing through me too. I wasn't an outsider anymore. I was part of the mountain's pulse, its lifeblood. I took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, letting the energy settle within me. It was time to make my move. I reached out with my senses, trying to locate the source of the guardian's power. It wasn't easy. The energy was tangled, woven deep into the fabric of the mountain itself. But I could feel the thread that bound the guardians to the land, feel the pulse that connected them to this ancient place. It was faint, but it was there. And if I could find it, I could sever it. The guardians, I knew, had no idea what I was planning. They were too focused on me, too sure of their own superiority, to notice the shift in the air. They thought they controlled the mountain, but they were wrong. I had been given the power to change the course of this confrontation. I had been chosen by the land itself. But even as I prepared to face them, I could feel the uncertainty creeping back into my mind. What if he failed? What if the guardians were too strong, too deeply entrenched in the mountain's power to be defeated? What if I was just another fool chasing after something beyond my grasp? I pushed the doubts away. I couldn't afford to second-guess myself now. The time for hesitation was over. I took one final look around, absorbing the quiet of the forest, the stillness of the mountain. The guardians were closing in, but I was ready. I had to be. This was it. The final confrontation was about to begin. The first strike came without warning. A surge of wind whipped through the clearing, sharp and unnatural. The trees groaned under the pressure, their branches swaying violently, as if caught in a storm that wasn't supposed to be there. My breath caught in my throat. The guardians were here. They had finally made their move. But this time, I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to let them control this moment. I stood at the center of the clearing, my feet planted firmly in the earth. I could feel the mountain beneath me, alive with energy. It pulsed, throbbed, as if it were waiting for the final act to unfold. The guardians were closing in, their presence growing stronger with each passing second. Yet I could feel their power being drained. Not from me, but from the mountain itself. They hadn't expected that. They had underestimated me, just as I had once underestimated them. I focused all my energy on the ground beneath me, on the pulse of the earth, on the thread that bound me to Mount Shasta. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to pull. The guardians, hidden in the shadows, seemed to sense what I was doing. Their voices rose, a chorus of rage and frustration. They knew their hold on the land was weakening. They could feel it, just as I could. But it was too late for them to stop it now. The energy in the air began to change. The wind, which had been tearing through the trees in a frenzied dance, suddenly stilled. It wasn't calm. It was a heavy stillness, a suffocating pause, like the calm before a storm that was far worse than anything nature could bring. The forest, which had been so alive with their power, seemed to shrink back, the trees bowing as though they too were waiting for the inevitable. I took a step forward, my hands outstretched, my mind focused on the guardians' weakness, their connection to the mountain's energy. They had fed off the land for centuries, but now they were starving. The more I pulled, the weaker their connection became, and the more their form wavered. One of them, the one who had spoken to me the most, its voice raspy, full of anger, emerged from the shadows, a hulking figure draped in tattered cloaks. Its eyes glowed a fierce yellow, like twin orbs of molten lava, and its mouth twisted into a snarl. It was the leader, the one who had believed itself invincible. "You think you can sever our connection?" The voice was low, vibrating through the ground like a tremor. "You are nothing, just a man who wandered too far." But the words did nothing to shake my resolve. I reached deep into the earth, pulling harder now, forcing the connection between the guardians and Mount Shasta to unravel. Their forms began to flicker, distorting like a mirage. The mountain's power, the one they had relied on for so long, was now mine to command. I could feel their panic. The leader howled, the sound like a roar of thunder, but it wasn't the roar of strength, it was a cry of desperation. The other guardians began to shriek, their voices rising in a chorus of rage and fear, realizing they were being torn apart, their control over the land slipping through their fingers like sand. But I wasn't about to stop. Not now. I dug deeper, forcing the energy to surge through my body, pushing it back into the mountain's roots, into the heart of Shasta. I wasn't just using the power of the land, I was becoming part of it. Every pulse of energy that flowed through me brought me closer to the truth. This battle wasn't just about the guardians. It was about me, about my place in this ancient world. I wasn't just a spectator anymore. I was part of the mountain's legacy. I had become what they feared. With a final guttural cry, the leader lunged at me, its form twisting and distorting, a blur of shadows and light. But it wasn't fast enough. I reached out with both hands, and with all the force I could muster, I slammed my palms into the ground. The earth shook beneath me, and the air crackled with energy. The guardians screamed, their forms flickering, and then, in a brilliant flash of light, they were gone. The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, I stood there panting, my heart racing. The mountain had stopped pulsing, and the energy around me had returned to a calm, almost serene state. I looked around, half expecting the guardians to reappear, but there was nothing. No shadows, no movement, only the quiet hum of the forest. I sank to my knees, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of what had just happened. I had done it. I had severed their connection. The guardians were gone. But as I breathed in the cool air, something else tugged at the edges of my consciousness. The victory felt hollow. I had won, yes, but at what cost? The mountain, the land, the power. I had become part of it, but I could feel the burden of it. I could feel the weight of the centuries, of the secrets that had been hidden beneath the earth. And I realized that I had only just begun to understand what it truly meant to be part of Mount Shasta. But before I could process the full extent of my actions, a voice broke the silence. "You've done it," it said. I turned, heart skipping a beat. It was the old woman, the one who had warned me. She was standing at the edge of the clearing, watching me with a look of quiet approval. "You've set the balance right," she continued. "But be careful. The land doesn't forget, and neither do its guardians." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words. The battle was over, but the true consequences were still unfolding. The wind had changed. The air was still now, heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. I sat on the forest floor, the damp earth cooled beneath me, grounding me in the reality of the moment. The guardians were gone, their forms dissipating into the air like smoke. But their presence lingered, an unspoken tension that now clung to the mountain, to the very soil beneath me. I felt different. The world around me, the trees, the rocks, the mountains themselves, they no longer felt distant. They felt alive, connected to me in ways I couldn't fully explain. The guardians were gone, but I knew deep down that their influence had left a mark. And as much as I had fought to sever that connection, I could feel a new bond forming in its place, a bond with the land itself. Mount Shasta was no longer just a place on a map. It was a part of me, and I was a part of it. The old woman's words echoed in my mind. Asterisk, the land doesn't forget. And neither do its guardians. Asterisk, I wasn't sure what that meant yet, but I knew that my journey had only just begun. The mountain had given me its power, but with that power came a responsibility, a duty to protect, to guard the secrets it held, and to keep the balance between the world above and the forces below. I stood slowly, my legs aching from the effort. The fog had cleared, and the mountain's peak now stood against a sky washed in the soft light of dawn. The first rays of the sun broke over the horizon, casting a warm glow over the land. For the first time since I had arrived, I felt at peace. The fight was over, but the road ahead was still uncertain. I had won, but I knew the price of that victory. And though I had severed the guardian's hold, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was waiting, something more ancient and more powerful than I could ever have imagined. As I made my way down the mountain, the weight of the world on my shoulders, I knew I would return to the forest. I had to, not just for the mountain, but for myself. The guardians had left their mark on me, yes, but I had also left my mark on them. I looked back one last time at the peak of Mount Shasta, its silent presence towering above me. The land was still, its energy calm for now. But I knew better than to think the story had truly ended. It had only shifted, like the mountain itself, and I was part of that shift now. Whatever came next, I would face it head on. This place had become my home, and I would protect it for as long as I could. Years passed, and Mount Shasta remained as it always had, timeless and unyielding. I returned often, not just to visit, but to learn. The guardians were gone, but their legacy lived on in the land's quiet power. I had become its protector, its keeper, but I had also become part of something much greater. One evening, as the sun set over the peak, I felt a presence, something familiar, yet distant. I knew then that the mountain's secrets were not fully revealed. The journey was far from over, and whatever was waiting in the shadows, I would face it. If you found this story gripping, don't stop here. The mysteries of Mount Shasta are far from over, and there are countless secrets still buried beneath its towering peaks. Share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think is hidden on that mountain? Do you believe in the guardians, or is there something even darker lurking in the shadows? If you want to discover more tales of the unknown, Be sure to like and subscribe. Click to watch the next chapter of our journey into the inexplicable. The adventure has only just begun. Are you ready to continue?